It's always great to come together when we have our lifelong learning sessions. And as Director of Alumni Relations, I always thank our alumni for joining us to come out early this morning so that we could learn something new. And so today we're going to learn something new from our speaker, Dr. Kelly Hare. Dr. Kelly Hare is the Executive Director of the Boone Center for the Family and oversees the Relationship IQ program. Dr. Hare is a researcher and speaker on the emotional experience of never married single women. Interesting. This is going to be a good presentation. She has presented at local, state, national, and international conferences on singleness, long distance dating relationships, eating disorders, and couples' use of communication technologies after infidelity. Interesting. As a licensed marriage and family therapist, she specializes in women struggling with eating disorders and adults wrestling with undesired singleness. Through researching, developing, and implementing materials that make the intersection of psychological science and theology relevant to daily life, Dr. Hare's career and scholarship have centered on helping young adults form healthy relationships, which we all know is very important. Prior to joining the Boone Center, Dr. Hare taught as a visiting assistant professor of psychology at Pepperdine Seaver College, so she's part of the family. Before moving to the West Coast, she served as a licensed professional counselor at Agape Christian Counseling Services, where for 7 years, she offered affordable professional Christian counseling for the St. Louis metro area and its surrounding counties. Dr. Hare earned her BS in nutrition from Furman University, her MA in counseling from Covenant Theological Seminary, and a PhD in family therapy from St. Louis University. So we are so pleased to have her come to the podium and speak to us today. Let me bring up Dr. Kelly Hare.
Thank you. Well, it is good to be here with each of you today. I have been looking forward to this time together. And it has been my prayer that each of you would take away a little something that will help you in relationships today. And as Dr. Dorn shared, I direct the Boone Center for the Family, and we're located at Pepperdine's Malibu campus and oversee the Relationship IQ program. Many of you may be thinking, what is the Boone Center for the Family? Because it is a unique place. It's not like other places where I can say it's like this that you know of. Boone Center is unique in that we are a relationship training and resource center. So we create programs that help people live out healthy relationships, and we train leaders at Pepperdine and in the church locally and nationally to live out and host these programs in their different communities and spheres of influence. So it's a really fun place to be, Boone Center for the Family, and we were founded by Pat Boone. So when you hear Boone Center, it is Pat Boone, who turns 90 this summer. I was reflecting. Okay, so today we're actually not going to talk about singleness, even as that's my research expertise, but if you would be interested in that conversation, I'd be glad to have it, and we can talk about that at some point. But today we're going to talk about the relationship attachment model. And this is something that I learned about 2017. And when I heard about this model, I was like, wow, this is amazing. I wish I had this framework to think about relationships much earlier in life, because it would have been so helpful to me. The relationship attachment model was created by Dr. John Van Epp, who is a Christian, and this model is very consistent with a Christian understanding worldview of who people are and how we're designed to live and function in the world. And the relationship attachment model was originally created as a guide for dating. How do you develop a healthy dating relationship from ground zero to the altar of marriage? But as it turns out, these principles are also applicable to other types of relationships, how you would build a friendship, how you would actually build an employee-employer relationship from the beginning of not knowing a person to bringing them on board. And the principles also apply in relationship with God. So we're going to focus on those 4 areas of relationship: dating relationships, friendships, employer-employee relationship, and relationship with God as we go through this model. So I'm going to describe the model to you, how it's kind of meant to function and work. Then we're going to talk about what happens when dynamics go awry and you start building relationships out of order. We're going to talk about those dynamics and patterns. And then at the end, we'll have some time for you to workshop and think through your relationships in those 4 areas in reference to this model. Okay, so relationship attachment model. What is attachment? There's a whole psychology of attachment and how we connect. And you can think about, do we have secure or insecure attachments? We're actually not going to focus on that element of attachment. We're going to talk about this as a framework for developing healthy relationship. But attachment in general, we want to think about that as how we connect, how we build connection with other people. And this model will function as a roadmap for developing healthy relationships. You think about living in LA. Can you imagine navigating your life here without your GPS on your phone? I cannot fathom it. I moved here 8 years ago, and if I lived here at a time and moved from a different place without GPS, I cannot imagine relying on a map and trying to study a map to try to get there without a map at my fingertips. It was readily accessible through the journey. And so that is how I think about the power of the relationship attachment model, that is a map to have with you along the journey of trying to develop healthy relationships. And if you're interested in going deeper, John Van Epp wrote a book called How to Avoid Falling in Love with a Jerk. I don't really love the title, but it is catchy. I'll give them that. Okay, so the relationship attachment model is very simple. There is one rule, and that is to build these 5 forces of relationship in this order. And we're going to unpack each of these forces in detail. But at the beginning, you start to know a person, and then you build trust, and then you start to rely on them, and you build in commitment and add the element of touch. And touch is going to look different, of course, in different types of relationships, and we'll talk about that. So these are the 5 forces of attachment. You'll notice I have a drum set here. Why would I have music pictured on this slide when we're talking about relationships? The idea is that these forces of building attachment and relationship, how you build these forces and at what level will change the quality, the tone, the mood, or the sound of the relationship. So you can think about these 5 forces as faders on a soundboard. You can move up the knowing of a person in relationship. You can move it down. You can move the force of trust up or down, rely, commit, and touch, and so forth. And again, the one principle is to, quote, stay in the safe zone by building these 5 forces in order, going incrementally from left to right. So if you're a math person, you want to keep a negative slope here, always going down in this direction. The idea is not, if at the beginning of a relationship, if we start all the way down here, the idea is not you want to get to know a person at a level 10 and then you start to trust them and you trust them at a level 10 before you start to rely. You want to build these forces as you go along incrementally in order from left to right. Like this. Okay, so let's talk about these forces in detail. Getting to know a person. Getting to know a person takes time. There are no shortcuts. When you are walking in relationship with a person over time, you get to see them in different seasons of life. And so it's important, if you have a negative first impression of a person, sometimes that you give them more of a chance and you watch them over time to see if that first impression was right or not. Funny story. My husband and I, we dated long distance 14 years after we first could have met in college. So we were living in the same freshman dorm, slept 12 feet apart for a year. He was in the basement, I was on the second floor, same room number. Never met in college, introduced 14 years later. But I remember seeing him in the dining hall. I knew he was friends of a friend. And I remember thinking, what's his problem? I had a really negative first impression of him. And if 14 years later, when that mutual friend wanted to introduce us, if I would have said, oh no, like, what's his problem? And I wasn't open to continuing to get to know him, could have missed out on a lot. He likes to joke, well, now I know what his problem is, and his problem is my problem. No, but it's important to get to know people over time through different seasons. You want to get to know what I call the good, the bad, and the ugly of a person. This is especially true in dating relationships. You want to have time to learn about who they are. You want to learn about their history. What is their family like? A lot of times people are similar to their families unless they have a clear story of here's how I'm different than my family. Otherwise, a lot of times they just kind of are similar because of how they grew up. You want to learn about their values, their beliefs, their attitudes, their behaviors over time. It's also important to learn from examples of other relationships. In dating, and if you're in the dating world yourself, or if you're working with others who are, it's important to ask them, what do they know about that person's other dating relationships? How does someone that you're dating talk about former dating partners? Do they talk about them with respect and care or not? I remember when I was dating and this gentleman's mom came to visit, and we were in the car driving somewhere, and she voiced, I really don't like how you're driving. You know, could you please drive with greater caution or slow down? And he didn't. And that was really significant for me because I thought after so long, that would be me. And that's how he would be treating me. That if I was expressing a concern, he might not take it seriously and blow past it because that's how he was responding to his mom. So examples of other relationships can be very powerful. And what's amazing when it comes to relationship with God is we have this in the Bible. We have lots and lots of examples and stories of how God and Jesus have treated people. We can learn about how Jesus treated the woman at the well with great care, compassion, humility. We know about how God led the Israelites out of Egypt, and we have a whole book of stories of examples of other relationships. And that's fun, that if we want to know God, we have the ability to do that through the Bible. We get to know friends over time in different seasons and different environments, just like we get to know God and dating partners over time. In the process of getting to know a potential employee, think about how you use examples of other relationships. This is what references are. You have the ability to call up a reference and say, tell me about your experience working with someone. And that can be really powerful. Sometimes it's easy to not want to take the time to call a reference, but it can be a very powerful way of getting to know about a person from their experience with someone else. It's also important to discern a person's relationship skills. When it comes to dating and finding a life partner, how a person does relationship is core and fundamental to will this go well. Same in a friendship. It's important to find friends who know how to do relationship well. I like to use the acronym PLACE as a way to discern and kind of think through someone's relationship skills in shorthand. So PLACE, playfulness, love, acceptance, curiosity, and empathy. Does this person know how to play and be playful? I remember when I was dating my now husband, we'd had 2 really great phone calls, and I was really, impressed and thinking like, he's not who I thought he was in college. And he, has so much to offer in all these areas, but I remember thinking, does he have like a fun, humorous, playful side? And so I called the girl who had introduced us and I asked that question, like, does he know, does he know how to have fun? And she kind of, I could tell she was surprised by my question. And she was like, yes, yeah, like, yeah, of course. Like, why am I asking this? But it was something that was important to me. And come to find out, my husband's actually very funny. And it was funny that I was ever questioning that he took dating, he said, so seriously that his humorous part of himself was absent at the beginning because he was so focused and so serious. But actually, he's very playful, and I should have never had to wonder that. But being able to have a quality of play and connecting in relationship is important. It's important in the workplace too, that if you're going to spend a lot of time with someone day in, day out in the workplace, it's great if this person has a sense of playfulness and fun to be able to engage in that way. Love is very important. Are people able to love and care well for each other? Acceptance. Acceptance doesn't mean that you agree with this person on every last thing and that you see the world the exact same way, but are you able to accept and care for and love the person as they are? Curiosity. It's important in relationship that there's a drive both that you bring to get to know the person and that the other person has to get to know you. You want to feel on the other end in friendships, dating relationships, that this other person wants to know you well. I remember in dating, I had this funny little test that I would do. I called it my curiosity test, where if I was dating someone, if we were in my apartment, we were sitting on the couch, I would mention, you see this bookcase over here? One of those shelves has my favorite books on it. And how would the person respond? I basically said, here's this amazing way you can get to know me. Are you, do you get up? Do you go look at the bookshelf? Do you try to figure out which shelf has my favorite books? Do you ask about those favorite books? What level of interest is present there? Now, don't worry, I didn't have all types of tests in dating, but this was just one fun thing because I wanted to know that this person had a curiosity and wanted to get to know me. In an interview setting, does the applicant show curiosity to get to know you, your experience in the workplace, the company, or are they just kind of there for themselves, expecting you just to get to know them? Empathy. Does this person, or are they able to appreciate what it is to be you and empathize with challenges and hardships that you are going through? I remember in dating my husband that early on, before we'd even had a phone call and we were just kind of messaging, I had expressed that I was hosting my friend's bridal shower in my apartment. And we got married later, and so I was in my 30s, and he offered such empathy around articulating, I hope you're able to care well for and celebrate your friend at this time, and recognizing that this might have been hard for me and that I wasn't married. And I was so blown away by his articulation of empathy at that moment that I was like, oh, wow, like he gets and understands and is able to think for what it might be like for me in this situation of hosting my friend's bridal shower. So being able to offer empathy. And of course, in all of this and relationship with God, God knows us fully and completely more than any person will ever know us or ourselves will ever know us. And we are called to consider all things a loss compared to the surpassing greatness of knowing God. And that's Philippians 3:8. And so having a strong element and a desire to know God and pursue him through the Bible, through the examples of other relationships, is a powerful way to build and begin to build your relationship with God. So let's move on to our next force here. Trust. Trust is the belief that a person will do right by me and others. And as we get to know a person, if we take in all of this data of who they are in the present, we learn about their past, their behaviors, their attitudes, their values, their beliefs, their relationship with family. Does that cultivate a sense of trust and belief, just the level of belief that this person would do right by me? Also, as an employer, as you gather all types of information from their resume, you interview them, you talk with their references, and you want to ask yourself, do I find myself trusting this person? Do I believe from all the data that this person would do right by me, by the company, or not? The impact of having trust is great. It allows a person to be vulnerable and experience a sense of safety, which fuels knowing. As there's trust in a relationship, both people begin to feel like I can share more and I can be known more because I believe that you will do right by me. I'm freed up to be more vulnerable, feel safe, and share more. And you can imagine not having trust in a relationship. What happens? There's greater anxiety, fear, withdrawal. It does not fuel trust. People feel like I don't want to be known if I don't believe that a person is going to do right by me. In relationship with God, God is fully and perfectly trustworthy. And we can't say that about anyone else. And that's amazing. And so we get to believe, we get to know that God is perfectly trustworthy and will always do right by us and will always treat us much, 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 much better than we deserve. And that's amazing. And we can allow that to fuel our desire and our interest in knowing him. You can imagine, or here, let's skip to the next slide for this example. Relying is where we put trust into action. So if I'm trusting a person, or trust looks like I believe that this chair will support my weight. Relying is putting that trust into action. So relying happens when I actually sit down and I take action in the midst of the belief that a person will do right by me. You can imagine if you were in a friendship and you've asked this friend, hey, will you give me a ride to LAX? Now it's a good friend if you're asking them to do that type of chore for you. We all know that here, less so in other places in the world. It's not such a big ask to go to the airport. It wasn't in St. Louis, but here it's a big ask. Can you imagine being in a situation where you are relying on someone to take you to the airport, but you don't trust that they're dependable, that they're going to show up when they said they are? That's a very anxious situation to be in. To feel like I am relying on a person that I don't trust. Think about this in an employer setting. If you are relying on a person to do work, get work done, and you don't trust them, what happens to your workload? It goes much higher if you're not able to actually rely on them, and your sense of stress and anxiety goes up. When relying goes poorly, oh, here comes the wind. This is where codependency can form. So what is codependency? When we're looking to fix, save, or rescue another person, or we're wanting a person to fix, save, or rescue us. If we rely on a person too much beyond how we're getting to know a person or trust them, if relying, this force is too high, then codependency enters into a relationship. And this is not healthy for the person who's being overly relied on or doing the relying themselves. Is it possible to rely on God too much? You have to think if I'm asking this question. The answer is not no. We can actually do this in a funny way in relationship with God. You might relate to this yourself or others you've been around. When we talk and use language like, I'm just trusting on God, but I'm taking no action myself. Let's say I want to be married, I want to get a new career, I want these good things in life to happen, but I'm taking no action myself. I'm taking no responsibility in the relationship with God. And it's great to trust God, but he also calls us to act and to move forward in the things we want. You'll often hear young women tend to be more prone to doing this than men, but saying, I really want to be married. I really want to find a life partner, a spouse, but but also not feeling like they need to take responsibility to actually do something. And so they're living in a way that they expect this person just to show up in their life out of nowhere. And occasionally God works that way, but we want to trust God. We want to trust God in a way that we take action, and not exercise a sense of codependency with God in a funny way of feeling like, oh, he's just going to do everything and I don't have to take action. We can fall out in relationship with God, we can swing to the other direction where we're over reliant on ourselves and feel like we have to make everything happen in our life and our relationships. And that's not healthy either. So we want to think about what is healthy interdependence and relationship with God, where we are trusting him and we are trusting him unto action, and we are trusting him unto healthy boundaries and relationship with him, where we're not taking on and doing more than he's called us to. Relying, going well, the good, moving slowly with clear boundaries. This is especially true in dating relationships, where a couple starts to rely on each other to get needs met, not trying to get all of those needs met at the beginning. Thinking in a employer-employee relationship, imagine you needed a nanny and you have kids. And you learned about a person, but you didn't really have the personal reference connection that your good friend knew this person and trusted them. How are you going to build up to rely on this nanny? So what's it going to look like? You have a phone call with them. What's your experience of getting to know this person over the phone? Does it leave you feeling more trusting of this person or not? You could have a Zoom call with this potential nanny. What happens with trust? If trust is going well, you could have the potential nanny come over to your home and spend some time with you present with the kids and get to know them more in their actual interaction with the kids. And if that goes well, you might trust them to have a short time caring for your children, maybe where you're somewhat nearby, maybe you're getting work done in the home or something like this. But you're going very incrementally as you get to know them, trust them, and rely on them. So if this all continues well, then maybe you would trust them for more hours. You would be farther away from the home. Excuse me. Reliance could grow to allowing them to leave the home with your kids. And what would commitment look like? We're going to shift here to commitment in this example. Whoops. Okay. You might sign this nanny up to care for your kids and commit to them for all day on Mondays, for example, before you would commit to them for 5 days a week. So there are ways in the employee-employer relationship where you can go very slowly to know, trust, rely, and commit to a person. Pepperdine's employment policy is consistent here, that they have a 90-day probation period. So you get to know somebody in the interview process, you're building trust, references, you bring them on board and you start to rely on them for the work to be done. But there's a 90-day probation period where if this does not go well, there doesn't have to be this ongoing commitment. There's an out for the commitment. And that can be really healthy to build in commitment as you've had a chance to actually rely on the person. Again, in the nanny situation, rely on them for one day versus all the days that you need. Have a 90-day probation period. So let's think together about what different levels or examples of commitment are in a dating relationship. What does commitment look like in a dating relationship? And let's brainstorm together. Just inflection points that represent commitment. And again, commitment is choosing to rely on the person in a future sense, that we're making a plan for something that's going to bring this relationship into the future. Yes. Exclusivity. Yes. Saying we're not going to open ourselves up to date other people. We're going to close ourselves down, that we're only going to be dating each other. Yes, that's a significant step of commitment. Yes. Okay. So you are going to make plans in the future to maybe go on a trip together and be present and fulfill the plan that's been created. Yeah. Other examples. Oh, that's a good example. Yes. Yes. Giving a key that represents you can come in the future into my space. Yes. Great. Other examples of commitment and dating relationships. Fidelity. Okay. Saying we're going to be faithful to each other and we're not going to actually living out the we're going to be exclusive element. Good. Meeting parents represents a sense of commitment of I'm not just going to introduce you to my parents if I don't think I'm going to be with you tomorrow. What else? What are other elements? I'll give you a hint. Think social media.
I was
Yes.
just gonna say marriage.
Marriage. Yes, that's a very high level of commitment. Exactly. Can't forget that one. Yes. What are some social media examples of commitment in dating relationships? Yes, Instagram official. And I even have students tell me that if you're if you post an Instagram picture with someone, that is more significant than them being in your reel. That's seen as less of a big deal, but that picture, because it's there and you see it and you don't have to like watch the reel that then is fading, but that picture says more to the commitment that people don't want to acknowledge that they're together unless they think they're going to be together for more time. Any other examples of commitment in dating relationships?
My son, he told
Yes.
me, if you click like.
Yes. Yes, it's
Social
communicating
Yeah.
something. Yes. Good, good. Oh, yes, that's very significant. Yes. Purchasing a home together. Yes, exactly. Good. Let's shift to friendships. What are examples of commitment in friendships? Oh, that's great. Remembering birthdays. Yes. That communicates a sense of I really care about you. My loyalty to you is there. Yes. Yes. Other events with them, with other people, family. Good.
Commitment to confidentiality.
Yes, that's great. Yes, that you've built, you can know, trust, rely on this person well, and so you can offer sharing information that says you need to not share this in the future, that this really is based on the commitment that this relationship is going to be there and be going well to share certain things. Yes, great.
Use that same what she just stated in like dating relationships as well, or
Yes, what you would choose to, there's certain elements of your life, your history, your story that you would choose to share, this part of knowing a person, that would only come ideally if you're doing the relationship and building it in a healthy way when the commitment is there to sustain it. And the fact that you're sharing, you're divulging this information really builds the commitment. And it portrays that I am believing that you're going to do right by me. I'm relying on you to hold this information, and it functions as a type of commitment to the relationship. Yes. How about if you set up a weekly phone call with a friend? That's a commitment going into the future. You don't tend to have that level of commitment to a friend that you just met. You're not going to start a weekly phone call until you have a sense of this relation. I really want to build into this relationship. Yes. 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 That's great. And labels, terms of endearment that are used. Yes. Good example. Other examples in relationship with friends. Yes.
I would say being there during hard times.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Yes. Being present in times of crisis. Yes. How about joining a group together, like a formal Bible study, for example, or a club, and saying, we're going to do this thing that has an ongoing commitment into the future? Any other ideas before we shift? Okay, let's talk about relationship with God. What are elements of commitment, steps of commitment in relationship with God? Yes. Yes, being baptized, that's great. Bible study, committing to an ongoing study. Or personal, yes, having a certain daily quiet time. Yes. Committing to obedience, sacrificing, and we say commitment involves sacrifice, that we're saying yes to a certain friendship, dating relationship, and especially in dating. So then we're saying no to other people. And in relationship with God, when we're saying, yes, I want to follow you, then that's saying, I'm going to sacrifice and say no to these other idols. I am not going to live just for my comfort, just for my pleasure, just for my image, just for anything else. I'm going to live for you, God. And that means I'm going to be saying no to these other things that I could be living for and orienting my thoughts, my feelings, my behaviors around. Yes. Yes. That's a great one. Committing to service. That could be in the church context or even outside of the church, but serving the Lord. Yes. that represents commitment. Other examples? Yes, yes. And especially on a daily basis. That's good. Church membership can be an aspect of a relationship with God and a certain commitment that you're going to be a part of a body of Christ in an ongoing way. You can make a commitment to personal study, for example, taking a seminary class online or something like that, can represent commitment to God. And what's fun about commitment is it really promotes belonging. That when you are taking your relationship into the future by engaging in certain steps that we just listed, there's a sense that you find belonging with this person. When you engage in a Bible study with a group of people, you're finding belonging. Your identity starts to be more connected to this person. And we're prone to finding our identity through relationships, but ultimately we want to have our identity most formed by relationship with God. That we experience our identity out of being God's child and being in relationship with him. You think about if you know someone famous, that you like to share that information because you're finding a sense of identity in that relationship. Oh, I know this person. I'm close or connected to this person. That we're built to find our identity in relationship, but we're really meant to find that identity in relationship with God. But we do experience a sense of belonging. You see this very clearly in marriage with a spouse. Okay. There it is. Okay. Our final force here, touch. So again, this framework was made in the context of dating. So touch is going to be most relevant in that sphere. But in general, first, I want to just name the power of touch. Touch is very powerful. It is very bonding. And that's why we want to leave it as the final force to develop. We want to make sure that know, trust, rely, commitment is all going well before building in the power of touch. We're going to talk about touch in romantic relationships in more detail, but first, touch in a friendship can be very powerful, to be able to offer a hug, to be physically present at a time of crisis. Touch and relationship with God is powerful. When the bleeding woman reached out to touch Jesus and she was healed, that there was power in touch when Jesus was present. Mary Magdalene used her tears and her hair to wash Jesus's feet. And that was a very powerful experience of relationship and expressing her commitment and devotion to him by using her hair and her tears to wash his feet. Doubting Thomas, he wanted to touch Jesus's side and the scars in his side and his hands because he was struggling to trust and rely and believe ultimately. And so he wanted to use the power of touch to help him in relationship. So touch is really powerful. And it's amazing that God gave us bodies and that we get to experience the power and blessing that touch can be. So let's talk about it more in the context of dating relationships. Right now, what I'm about to shift a little bit. So touch is a part of the relationship attachment model. Where we're going now in this conversation comes from the Relationship IQ's program, What About Sex, where we talk about the biological and the relational impacts of physical intimacy on the continuum from holding a person's hands to sexual intercourse. So when I talk about intimacy, physical intimacy, think continuum, that all of this is on a continuum. So we're going to talk about, again, the relational and the biological impacts of touch in a dating relationship. Touch, as we said, is powerfully bonding. Touch is also blinding in that bonding. So when we have touch out of whack, we can tend to miss the red and yellow flags of a relationship that come up when you're in this process of know, trust, rely, commit. If touch is very high, you experience a high level of bonding in a way that allows you to ignore red and yellow flags because you're so bonded. It's important to understand the power of touch. And we're going to talk about this. Neurochemicals are values neutral and lose their effectiveness over time. So what are the neurochemicals involved in physical intimacy? Dopamine is the reward chemical. This is the excitement pleasure chemical that is engaged when physical intimacy happens. Again, continuum, holding hands to sexual intercourse. And I know it's so windy. You guys are doing great hanging in there. I hope you're feeling some of the heat for the heat lamps. Dopamine is values neutral. What this means is that dopamine works whether or not the physical touch is good for a person, whether or not the relationship is good for a person. Holding a person's hand, unless you're in like super conflict with a person, feels good. Physical touch, our bodies are designed for it to feel good. And the dopamine reward chemical is activated even when a dating relationship is not healthy. And so it's important to realize that physical intimacy will feel good even if it isn't good. But that's how the body works. You think about other areas of life where dopamine is activated. If you're going down a roller coaster, that's really exciting. And so you have the dopamine response. If you're shoplifting, which is something you should not be doing, it's something that's actually exciting. And so dopamine will be active in a person, even if the activity itself is bad. So dopamine is values neutral. Dopamine also loses its effectiveness over time. So what that means is there needs to be more stimulation, more excitement to get the same response. You think about a roller coaster. You go on a roller coaster the first time, the second time, it's super exciting. It's super exhilarating. You go on that roller coaster the 10th time, not so much, not as exciting. There's a sense that you want more. This is the addictive chemical at work. Alcohol, you have some alcohol, it feels good, it's relaxing, but then you want more, you need more and more to get the same impact. And so this happens in physical intimacy, and it can explain why people tend to go further, faster in subsequent dating relationships, because they're looking for more of an excitement impact. And so they feel like they need to go farther, faster in subsequent relationships. It can also explain why people have a strong connection to their first love, that there was a lot of power and excitement in that first experience of physical intimacy on a continuum. Oxytocin and vasopressin are bonding chemicals. So bonding happens. These chemicals are also values neutral. If you're engaged in physical intimacy with a person, you're going to feel bonded to them. This is how the body is designed and made to work, whether or not the person is actually good for you. This can explain, in the cases of sexual abuse, why sometimes people who have been abused feel bonded to that person, because that's how the body is designed to work, that we're meant to feel bonded to a person through physical intimacy, that these chemicals are values neutral and they're not judging whether or not this is actually good, that the chemical reaction happens regardless. And these chemicals also lose their effectiveness over time. And so when people have experiences of serial dating relationships or the hookup culture where they're continually bonding to a person, but it's ending, and then bonding to a person and it's ending, they lose their ability to bond well. And so physical intimacy starts meaning less, and it has a less bonding effect. And so that's, again, where it's important to go slow in the touch department, to not have a habit and a pattern where the bonding mechanism is used so much that it starts to kind of break down, in a sense that less bonding happens because it loses its effectiveness over time. So, and again, that's part of the first love phenomenon, that you may have felt really bonded to this person because they were your first experience in dating. Synapses in the brain. Our brains are moldable, and this is good. And our brains tend to experience habits or patterns. And so if we're living out serial short-term relationships, the brain comes to expect, oh, and then the relationship is going to end. You might notice that people have a certain pattern or habit that they date a person for 3 months, that most dating relationships are 3 months long, or they're most 6 months long, or they're 1 year long, that our brains get used to habits around relationships. And so we want to be conscious of that. And these habits are powerfully formed by touch based on how the brain's impacted. So let's think more on the relational impacts of physical intimacy. As I mentioned, we say that sex, again, continuum sexual intimacy, bonding is blinding. And we will miss the red and yellow flags when we're overly bonded or connected to a person. And this is just really powerful and helpful information for people who are in dating relationships to be aware of. You may have had this experience where a friend is dating someone, a family member is dating someone, and you're thinking, and others are thinking, why are you in this relationship? Like, look at all of these terrible problems. Well, you can see clearly because you're not in the relationship. You're not bonded and connected to this person. So as I'm working with young people, I'll help them think about and ask the question, how do other people feel about me in this dating relationship? Because those other people probably have clear vision as to what's going on because they're not blinded. Doesn't mean other people know exactly if this person's right for you or not, but it's really important to give other people's voices a fair shake and really listen to what other people have to say because they're not blinded by physical intimacy. When touch is too high in a relationship, out of whack, it can lead to a series of repeated breakups. You may have had this experience, or those that you know, where someone's dating someone, they break up, a little bit of time goes past, they get back together. They break up, they get back together. And often, but not always, sometimes physical intimacy is out of whack. And there's been so much bonding that people's bodies are really missing each other. And that drives repeated breakups, even when the relationship itself is not going well. Stunted emotional growth. We know that physical intimacy and bonding often shuts down the emotional growth of the relationship, and the relationship can become overwhelmingly about physical touch and connection versus growing the emotional bond and connection of the relationship through know, trust, rely, and commit. So it can stunt relational growth and shut down these other processes from developing when too much touch enters too fast into a relationship. Good news here. As young people often will hear this information, and you may have experienced some of this yourself. I experienced some of this myself when I first learned this information of like, ooh, well, I've messed up. And this all makes sense. And I realized I would have made other choices if I would have known this information. The good news is, just we talked about synapses in the brain is moldable. The brain can be changed, and God has wired us for forgiveness. He has made our brains in a way that we can reset our patterns through a time of absent, of not engaging in physical intimacy on that continuum. The bonding dynamic and the reward chemical excitement dynamic can be reset and rebuilt through a period and a time of backing away from physical intimacy, so that holding a person's hand is re-energized as something that's exciting and fun and has meaning and bonding. And there's good news in relationship with God, kind of back to the relationship attachment model. We can think sometimes, oh my gosh, I have to make my relationship with God happen. I have to spend all this time getting to know him, trust, rely, commit. The good news is that relationship with God is a two-way street, and that he is pursuing you. He knows you fully and completely, and he trusts you, and he's relying on you to do the good things that he has called you to do. And he is fully committed to you to the point that he had Jesus die on the cross for your sins and for relationship with you through forgiveness. And that's powerful and amazing. That's an incredibly high level of commitment. And so that's the good news, is that relationship with God isn't about you have to do everything and you have to make everything happen, but God is pursuing you, and he knows you completely. More good news. When it comes to the relationship attachment model, it's fun, it's exciting, it's a powerful, helpful framework. You can hold this into your head and ask yourself, how am I doing in know, trust, rely, commit, and touch as it comes to healthy friendships, dating relationships, employer-employee relationship, not so much the touch in that relationship, of course. But you're not meant to do this alone. You're meant to do this and live this out in community with other people, where you're inviting other people into this relationship building process and talking through with others. How am I doing in building this dating relationship? How am I doing as I'm working with this employee? How can I rely on this person better or more or less, or based on what's warranted by knowing and trusting? That we are not called to figure out relationships all by ourselves, but we get to do them in community with other people and inviting input and help along the way. So now I want to invite you to look at your worksheets, and we're going to talk. I'm going to grab a sheet here. So begin, not quite yet, but begin to think about how you are prone to doing relationships dating, friendships, relationship with God, employer-employee relationships. But we're going to talk, so start thinking as I talk about what goes wrong when we get these forces out of order. So we've talked largely about how to develop these forces. We're going to go into more detail about dynamics that happen when we get these forces out of order. So what happens if we get to know a person well, but we aren't actually building trust, rely, commit, and touch? And you can think, well, what's wrong with that? You're just getting to know a person. I want you to imagine being in a friendship where there's this knowing that's developing and happening, but you can sense the person doesn't really trust you and they're not really relying on you. What comes to mind? Yes. Yes, yes. The relationship will probably fizzle out. They might experience you as aloof to them, where they're getting to know you a lot, but they're not really connecting. The relationship, the attachment is not forming through these other elements. What about trusting? What if you enter into relationships where you're trusting a person a lot from the beginning, out of proportion to the extent to which you've gotten to know them or rely, and you're not building rely, commit, and touch? What happens here in a relationship that looks like this with too much trust? Yes. Yes, okay. There's a sense of it is a delusion because it's not built on this knowing. This can be a very naive place to be, of thinking, and I've fallen into this a bit myself. The family I grew up in, thankfully, there's a lot of integrity and people were very trustworthy. There were other faults, but there was a lot of trustworthiness. And so I am prone to trusting people pretty quickly. And that can be great, but it does have its downsides in that I could be in not good situations because I've overly trusted a person beyond the extent to which I've gotten to know them. Okay. What about relying on a person too much without knowing and trusting? We touched on this a little bit. Yes. 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 Disappointment that you're relying on for something and they're not actually coming through. They're not able to be faithful because they're not actually trustworthy. So this can be a very anxiety prone situation to be in. You think about this happens in group projects and friendships in the classroom where you're stuck in a group and you have to rely on the other people to get the work done, but you might not actually know them or have the trust built in. So this can be a very anxiety laden situation. So if you're teaching, think about that and have empathy for your students, that you're sticking them in a situation where they have to rely on somebody without potentially the knowledge or trust to go with it. What happens if we rely too little, but we're building these other forces? Burnout. Okay. Yes. Because you're being hyper independent and you're not sharing burdens with others. This, relationship dynamic can be seen as emotionally restricted, that you're struggling to actually put your weight, like you said, on another person. Okay. What happens when you've got too much commitment in the relationship? Commitment's out of whack. What does this feel like? Okay. Needy. Yes. You might feel stuck. Have you ever signed up for a long-term group or said, yes, you'll meet a friend every week to go bike riding or something, but you didn't have these forces developed, and so you feel stuck because you've got this commitment that isn't supported by these other forces? That's not a fun place to be. What happens though if commitment is too low and you're developing these other forces? Think about in dating. What does this look like? Yes. 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 Right. Right. Yes. Yes. It's very common. And we can talk about why that happens here in a moment. Especially in dating, this is seen as the player, the person who's having these other elements of the relationship, but they're not committing and they're moving on to the next person. we talked a bit already about too much touch, repeated breakups, stunted emotional growth, overly bonded, missing the red and yellow flags. What about if there's too little touch in a dating relationship? What's the experience of this? Loneliness, there could be a sense of insecurity. Does this person really desire me physically? And touch brings enjoyment and pleasure to a relationship, and it can make the relationship feel kind of rockier, bumpier, harder. We say in marriage, being blinded to your spouse's shortcomings and failures can be a really great thing because you have this commitment and you're stuck with this person. So having the blinding element of touch or the smoothing over element of touch in marriage is really helpful, actually. So touch is an important aspect of the relationship. And when it's not built, the relationship can feel off as well, that there can be insecurity around desire and a lack of just positivity and pleasure to the relationship. Okay, let's move a little more complex. We talked about kind of isolated forces out of whack. And again, this is going to change the quality, the sound, the mood of the relationship. Sometimes you see this phenomenon that I alluded to at the beginning, where you've got somebody who tries to build one force all the way to the top before they build the next force. Why would someone do this? Why would they feel like, and I've talked to people who've recognized, oh yeah, that is what I tried to do. I'm going to try to get to know a person all the way before I trust them. And then I'm going to have this total perfect belief that the person will do right by me before I actually start to rely on them. And then I'm going to totally rely on them before I then do commitment. They're trying to move this, only working on one force at a time. Why would somebody do this? Yes.
I guess because they feel like if they build the first two, like know and trust, then the other three will come easily.
Right. It's often a protective, well, I can protect myself if I fully know a person and then I trust, like I'm not going to get hurt. And then if I fully trust before I rely, it tries to be a protective mechanism. But what actually happens is when you're up here all the way and you fall, because say relying doesn't go well, there's still loss there of, oh my goodness, I've gotten to know this person and I'm very connected to them because I know them so much, but yet I find out I can't actually rely on them. There's still loss and pain and heartache there in the relationship. And that's why it is the healthiest way to build these forces incrementally versus all one way.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So wouldn't knowing go along with relying, because as you get to know the person, you're learning if you can rely on them.
Right.
Is
So knowing is the knowledge, is the information. Trust is the belief, and rely is the trust in action.
Got it. I missed that part.
Okay.
When
And
I
so
walked
then
in.
you're seeing like, does this go well? And then you're able to increase as it goes well. Good question. Let's talk about this force. When you've got a relationship that's kind of lopsided, you've got these forces. What is this in, I don't know how to say it without trying to give it away, a quasi, where romantic interest is possible. Let's put it like that. Where romantic interest is possible, if this is what the relationship looks like, what would we call this? Yes. Yes, the friend relationship, the situationship, where there could be romantic interest, but this is not building or growing. Again, sometimes people are so afraid of commitment and touch because of their power and their significance that they camp out over here and they're afraid. What happens in a dating relationship if we, yes, exactly. Now we have friends with benefits here. It can be really fun to map these different qualities of a relationship and be able to see what is actually going on. So let's think together, and you can jot on your sheet. I think I put the media example. Let me make sure. Yes. Okay, let's think together. Think for yourself independently first. How would you say media portrays how a relationship to be developed? Go ahead and plot that on the chart there. What do you see in movies, media? What's kind of the idea of how they would suggest this is how you should go about building? Oh, and let's think romantic relationship. What should this look? Okay, although don't relate at all. Think about what you think media's portrayal of how a romantic relationship should look. That's true. Maybe not Hallmark. I don't know. Kind of more mainstream. What do you see? That's a good question. Okay, so jot down what you think this would look like. Okay, let me hear from you all. Where would you say the knowing should go roughly? Middle. Like, okay, you should get to know a person. This is good. This is good. What about trust? What should happen with trust? Should you trust? Yeah, leave it. Yeah. Don't trust. Don't trust. Remain kind of skeptical. What about rely? Should you rely? Yeah, this is what I kind of hear students say the media says. Get to know a person, don't trust them, but actually rely on them. Like, don't believe they're going to do right by you, but put yourself in the position to be relying on them some. And then what should commitment be? Yeah, yeah. And then what should touch be? Right, boom. Okay, so let's think about the emotional quality of this relationship. There's a lot of anxiety here, and there's a lot of bonding here. So how have I worded it? It's a stunted and anxious relationship because you have a high level of touch and you have this anxiety department. And commitment is supposed to bring a sense of security and safety. So you don't have this security factor here, and you have this anxious factor, and you have the relationship being stunted because of a high level of touch. It's kind of interesting. All right. I want to invite you now to turn to the next question and think for yourself. How do you tend to do relationships? If you're married, you can think back to when you were dating. You could also think about kind of what are the qualities of your marriage around know, trust, rely, commit, touch. How are those forces operating? So you kind of get to choose what you do there. Think about your friendships. Think about your relationship with God. What are your kind of patterns and approaches? And nobody has the perfectly negative slope in our natural fallen state. So think about what your patterns tend to be and notice similarities and differences between your patterns and the different types of relationships. And think about where would have those patterns come from? Are they what you observed in significant relationships growing up, in friendships and family relationships? Are they what you observed other people did? Are they in reaction to what you saw and observed? So I know this will take you a little bit of time to think through how you do relationships. All right, keep thinking through how you tend to do relationships, where these patterns came from. If you have different patterns in friendships versus dating relationships, relationship with God, how you'd experience employees, work relationship. And take just another minute and then we'll talk more together. Okay, let's go ahead and talk together. Would love to walk through some of your patterns if you're open to sharing. Who would like to share about a friendship pattern? And we'll talk about, and then if you'll share kind of what a friendship pattern of building relationships has been for you. Yes.
I just want to, I think in maybe all relationships or most relationships, I was like pondering the complication of knowing, right? And it's something I've been working on, and now I'm a therapist, so things I work on with my clients as well. But like there's a veil almost over knowing, and often we filter what the person, like what we're getting to know about a person through our own experience or lack of experience. And so we often project onto a person versus believing who they are or like receiving who they are. And so like that can just throw everything out of whack, right? Where you think you know someone and you thought you prioritized that, but it's actually very low in reality.
Yes.
And so I think that's the part that I've always, I've been trying to work on more recently in my life in terms of developing relationships with anyone, no matter the type of relationship, is actually knowing them
Yes,
for
that's
who
great.
they are.
That's great. That's a really great word because we can do that. We can think somebody reminds us of someone, or there's a certain stereotype or a certain association, and then we can project that on the person. And we want to be careful not to do that. Yeah. So you're aware this, it's hard to feel like you're really doing this. Well, yes.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Yes, I guess I was not opposite from what she said, but I think I've had a few burns in a relationship where I think because I also grew up in a pretty stable home with lots of trust and security, that I wasn't able to really see it coming. So I learned a lot from that, and I felt like that helped me in the future. It's almost like you're grateful for it because then you're able to make better choices as you go forward. Maybe you can see it more clearly the next time where you
Okay.
go, okay, that,
Yep.
and it can be a pattern on your own part too. It's not just not trusting another person, but why am I allowing myself to trust that person? So
Right.
I don't know, just kind
Uh,
of.
so it
Sometimes
sounds
it's
like-
one way. Sometimes it can be a one way trust.
Yes.
You assume you're trusting them and that they're trusting you, but you maybe shouldn't be trusting them. So you just
Right.
get burned.
Right. After experiences of getting burned, it will slow us down often in the trust, rely, commit department.
Right. That's good.
And the more aware we are of that, the more we can be mindful
Right.
and say, okay, I don't want to do this so slowly. Like, yes, I was hurt, but I need to work on trusting, relying,
Right.
and we can kind of question what we know of a person. Yes,
Yeah,
thank you for
That was
sharing.
well said.
Yeah, painful experiences can definitely impact how we go about this framework. How about a romantic relationship? What are some patterns? Love for someone to share.
I'm happy
Yes.
to share from a romantic relationship perspective. I'm blessed to have been with my childhood sweetheart forever. Literally since we were in diapers together. So he knows my family, I know his family. The knowing is very high. the trust level is high through the years, but I find that there are seasons of life that we go through. And, I certainly rely on him very much. The commitment is high for sure. But through our, I don't know, 40 plus years of knowing each other, and I mean, the touch is high, certainly now with us being married. We waited until later in life to actually get married because his mother encouraged us to get to know other people and have other experiences and relationships to compare to now our marriage. But what I'm trying to express in terms of the seasons of life changing is, now that we've had a son and there are different challenges that we've gone through in life, sometimes that trust level has been really, really high because we've been there for each other through so many challenges. And then at other times when it's been a lot of tests that come along with just being married for so long, the trust bank has had more withdrawals than deposits. So it's interesting to just experience those seasons of life and how this is a cycle. I've experienced it at least in that regards in terms of romantic relationships.
Yes, thank you. That's great. Yes, relationships can go through cycles. These forces are interrelated. They'll impact each other. There's different seasons where touch is going better or it's less developed. And you can ask kind of what's going on here that's impacting the touch element. And I find personally in all relationships, this is just a very helpful framework for me to, on a shorthand, say, how is a relationship doing? What element needs more work? Am I, with an employee, am I struggling to rely on them? What's driving that? Is it really coming from something that's happened that I know that needs to be addressed? Is it just me that I'm prone to not relying on people as much and being more independent? So yeah, my hope is that this provides just a very quick shorthand way for you to assess how a relationship is going, even in relationship with God, and say, often we'll pray, God, help me be committed to you. I really want to rely on you. Well, if you're struggling to do that, say, okay, maybe I need to be spending more time knowing God that's going to fuel my trust, rely, and commitment to him. It's just helpful to understand how these forces work together. So we'll go ahead and end here, but I really appreciate your participation and engagement with these questions along the way.
Thank you, Dr. Hare. I would like to open it up for any questions if there are anything else that is on your mind related to the relationship attachment model or something that you would like to bring up to the group.
Hi, I just want to thank you for this great presentation. And I think more than anything, you gave a title to feelings or emotions that I've had.
Oh, good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Everything is generational, like from you're talking social media, young people. Then there's the other spectrum over 40, 50. So people change, widowers, divorces. I went to my high school reunion. About the majority of them were all married for, well, I'm going to say how many years, 40 years or something, and I'm single. So it was interesting to see the dynamics of couples and sharing all their kids and pictures. And I thought, because I'm not on any social media for private reasons and just because I feel it's safe for me. But I think it's interesting how this applies to different, as you evolve into different ages. Does it change?
Yes,
you're
as people
observing?
grow through relationships and experience different types of relationships, as we were kind of saying, especially when there's hurt, it will impact how we do these
Yeah.
forces. And when we have really healthy relationships, that will help us grow in being healthy in other relationships when we have
Do you
positive
recommend
experiences.
Giving that sheet to somebody?
I actually, it's a funny question, and we have a family friend, and he's single, and he was dating, and we ended up one night talking about this relationship attachment model over ice cream, and he shared it with the girl he's dating, and then she came over, and we all had a conversation about this, and they found it really helpful to talk about this overtly with each other of how are we doing in this, and be able to kind of self-diagnose, oh yeah, we're struggling here. You know, what's going on? So I think can be really helpful. Yeah. And generate good conversation. Yeah.
Any other questions? Thoughts? Wonderful. Well, will you join me in thanking Dr. Hare once again?
Thank you. And again, so glad to be here. Thank you for having me.